She walked 300 miles barefoot from the mission. A Lakota chief met her at the river. The river was lower than it had been since the drought year. I remember thinking that the first morning I saw her, because I was looking at the water line when she appeared on the far bank, not at her. At the line of mud the water had left behind on the stones, pale and cracked and old-looking, the way everything was starting to look to me by then. She was standing in the shallows on the other side. That is all I can tell you about the first second. She was standing there and her feet were in the water and she was not moving. The current was low enough that you could ford it in places without the water reaching your knee. She would have known that. She wasn't crossing. She was just standing. I had come down to the river because I came down to the river every morning. Not for water, we had a boy for that. Not to wash. I came because it was the one place I could go where no one followed me, and I had become a man who needed that. A man who needed to be somewhere that no one expected anything of him. I watched her from the eastern bank. She didn't look up. After a while she sat down at the edge of the water and put her face in her hands. I turned and walked back to the camp. That was in the moon the Lakota call Campasapa Y, the moon when the chokecherries ripen black. Late summer, hot in the day and cold at night, and the grass already going yellow at the tips. I will tell you what I was by then, so you understand what she walked into. I was 53 years old. I had been chief of my band for 19 years. I had held the people together through 2 relocations, 1 smallpox winter, 1 massacre that was called something else by the men who did it, 3 failed hunts, and the slow grinding thing that had no name. The thing that happened when you watched everything you had built get taken piece by piece, not all at once, just a little at a time, so that by the time you understood what had happened it was already gone. My wife, Swallow Standing, had died in the spring, not of sickness, of grief I think, though I never said that to anyone. She had watched the same things I watched and she had carried it in her chest, and in the end the chest had given out. She was 41 years old. The healers said her heart. I believe them. I just also believe what I said. After she died, I stopped sleeping in the lodge we had shared. I moved into the smaller one, the one used for storage. I didn't eat much. I did my work, I spoke at council, I settled disputes, I made the decisions that had to be made, but it was like doing those things from a long way away. Like watching someone who looked like me do them. The younger men watched me and said nothing, but I could feel them watching. The old women brought me food I didn't eat. My son, who was 22 and already carrying more than a son his age should carry, came to sit with me sometimes and say nothing, which was the right thing to do, and I was grateful for it, but it didn't reach whatever place in me had gone dark. I had started going to the river each morning the way a man goes to a place when he's not sure why he's going there, just that he keeps going. That is what she walked into. I did not go back to the riverbank that day. I heard from one of the women that evening that a stranger had come into camp from the east, a woman, half Lakota and half something else, on foot, no horse, no shoes. She had been brought to the healing lodge and given food, and they were watching to see if her feet would need cutting. I didn't go to see her. The next morning I went to the river and she wasn't there. I felt something, but I didn't name it. The day after that, I was at the western edge of the camp checking the picket line. We'd had a horse go lame and I wanted to see the wrapping myself, when I heard someone behind me. I turned and she was standing about 4 horse lengths away, watching me work. She was taller than I'd expected from what the women described. She had her mother's blood in her face and her father's in her height, or maybe it was the other way around. I don't know. Her hair was black and thick, and she'd braided it back on one side. She was wearing a dress someone in camp had given her. You could tell it wasn't hers by the fit of it. Her feet were wrapped in clean linen. She said in Lakota that was accented but good, "You are the chief." It wasn't a question. I said I was. She said, "I walked from the mission at Red Fork." I looked at her feet and then back at her face. Red Fork was 300 miles east and south, maybe more if you were on foot and avoiding the settlements, which she would have been. I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I was told to." I waited. "My mother told me," she said, "before she died. She said, when the time comes, go west along the Niobrara until you find the band of sitting elk. She said you would know why when you got there." I had not been called by my name, my true name, in 2 years. The younger people used a title. The old ones who would have used my name were mostly gone. Hearing it from this stranger did something to the back of my throat that I did not expect and did not want. I said, "I don't know your mother." She said her name was Moon on the Water. She was born in this band. She left when she was 16. I turned back to the horse's leg and looked at the wrapping. I remembered Moon on the Water. She had been a young girl when I was a young man, 8 or 10 years younger than me. She had left with a trader. People said different things about how that had gone. I said, "Your mother is dead." "Last winter." I said, "I'm sorry for it." She said she wasn't sorry to go. She was tired. I understood that in a way I didn't say. I finished with the horse and walked back toward the camp. She walked beside me. I didn't tell her to, and I didn't tell her not to. Her name was Ine Waste, good mother, though she had no children. She told me later that her mother had given her that name as a kind of prayer, or maybe a kind of challenge. She had grown up at the mission, which meant she had grown up in 2 worlds and fully in neither one, which is its own kind of wound that people who haven't lived it don't understand. She spoke English and Lakota, and enough French to argue with the priests, she said, and she said it with a flatness that told me the arguing had been real and the priests had not won. She was 31 years old. She had never married. She had worked at the mission as a teacher of the younger children, and when her mother died she had stayed another month, and then she had done exactly what her mother told her to do. She packed what she could carry and she walked west. She said she had not known what she would find. She said she had not known she would find a chief who looked like he was trying to disappear. I said, "I'm not trying to disappear." She looked at me the way women look at you, when they know you are lying but have decided not to press it yet. I let it go. She stayed. Nobody asked her to and nobody told her to leave. She fit herself into the life of the camp the way water finds the low place, without announcement, without drama, just suddenly there and part of things. She helped with the children in the mornings because she knew how to do that. She was useful with medicines. The mission had taught her some things the healers found worth knowing and they found worth exchanging for. She learned the names of everyone and used them. She ate what was put in front of her and didn't complain. I watched all of this from a distance. I told myself I was watching because she was a stranger and it was my responsibility to watch strangers. That was true. It was not the whole truth. What I noticed, what I couldn't stop noticing, was that she moved through difficulty without flinching. She had walked 300 miles on her own, half of it in bad country, all of it on feet that had blistered and cracked and bled. And when people asked her about it, she said only that she had kept walking because stopping felt worse than continuing. She said it like it was an obvious thing, like it was just a fact about walking. I thought about that at night in the storage lodge. About what it took to keep walking when stopping would have been so easy. About how I had stopped walking in the way that mattered and hadn't noticed when it happened. It was about 3 weeks after she arrived that I did the thing I am ashamed of. There was a council, a question about moving the winter camp. One faction wanted to go north, toward the Powder River country, and another wanted to stay in the valley where we were. It was a real disagreement with real stakes and people I respected on both sides. I sat at the council and I listened to both sides, and when it came to me to speak I said something. I don't even remember what I said. I said something that was a version of nothing, balanced, careful, uncommitted. I let the council end without resolution, because I hadn't given them one. Afterward outside she was there. She had not been at the council. Women didn't sit at the main council in that band, though the senior women had their own council that fed into it. She was there outside, turning something over in her hands, a strip of rawhide she was braiding. She looked up at me and then back down. She said, "They needed you to decide." I said, "There are good arguments on both sides." She said, "There are always good arguments on both sides. They needed a chief." I walked past her. That night I lay in the dark and I was angry. I was angry at her for saying it, and I was angry at myself because she was right and I knew it and I had known it before she said it. I had known it in the council. I had felt the men waiting for me to speak clearly, and I had not spoken clearly because I didn't have the energy for the argument that would follow, and because some part of me had stopped caring which way we went, and this was the part that was hardest to look at, because I had gotten used to not being in the world fully, and not being in the world fully meant not being responsible for the weight of it, and there was a relief in that. A small, shameful relief. Swallow Standing would have said the same thing A Waste said. She would have said it differently, quieter, later in the dark, just the two of us, but she would have said it. I had not let myself think about Swallow Standing speaking to me for months. It hurt in a specific place, like pressing on a bruise you forgot you had. I called the council back the next morning and I made the decision. We would go north. I laid out my reasoning and I answered the objections, and when it was done, there was an ease in the lodge that had not been there the day before. People knew where they stood. That is what a decision does. That is something I had known for 30 years and forgotten for 6 months. She didn't say anything about the council. She didn't have to. When I walked past her that morning, she looked at me and there was something in her face, not pride, not satisfaction, something quieter than that. Like she had expected it. I found that I wanted to deserve that look. I don't say that simply. It is a complicated thing, wanting to deserve someone's regard when you are a man who has not wanted much of anything for a while. It was not comfortable. It was the opposite of comfortable. It was like circulation coming back into a foot that had gone numb, painful first, then real. I started eating, not a lot but regularly. I started sleeping in my own lodge again. There was a morning in the 2nd month. We were 2 weeks into the move north, making camp along a creek that came down cold out of the hills, when I woke before dawn and could not get back to sleep. I went outside and the sky was still black except for the east where it was starting to go dark blue, and the stars were still out and the air had a first bite of autumn in it. A Waste was awake too. She was sitting outside her lodge. The women had built her own small lodge, and she had thanked them without making a thing of it. And she had a blanket around her shoulders, and she was looking at the same piece of sky I was looking at. I sat down a little distance from her, not close enough to mean anything, just near enough to be near someone. We sat there for a long time. The sky went from black to blue to gray to the first pale yellow. After a while she said, without looking at me, "My mother said you were kind. When she was young, she said you were one of the kind ones." I said, "I was younger then." She said it was not the youth. She said it was in you. I didn't say anything. She said, I think she was right. The sky was fully light by then. The camp was starting to move around us. I could hear the horses and the low voices of the women starting the fires. I said, "Why did she tell you to come here?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think she knew I had nowhere else to go, and I think she knew you needed someone who didn't need you to be anything other than what you are." I sat with that. I said, "What am I?" She looked at me then, directly. The light was clean and cold and early, and she looked at me without any performance in it, just looked and said, "A man who is still here, who kept the people together when smaller men would have broken, who is still worth something even when he has forgotten it." I looked away first. It was a month after that when she came to me at night. I don't mean she came without invitation. I had asked her properly through the right women, and she had answered yes properly, and that had been 3 days before. 3 days was the right amount of time. You use the time to be sure. I was sure. She came in when the camp was quiet and the fire was low, and I was sitting with my back against the lodge pole, the way I always sat at night. She came in and sat across from me, and we looked at each other in the low light for a moment that was neither short nor long. She said, "I want you to know something." I said, "Tell me." She said, "I did not come here to save you. I came here because my mother told me to, and because I had nowhere else, and because something in me said this was right. But I want you to know that what I see in you, what I've seen since the first week, is not a man who needs saving. It is a man who got lost for a while and was finding his way back. I would not have stayed for a man who needed saving. I have my own life to live." I said, "I know that." She said, "I don't think you fully know it yet, but you will." She moved around the fire and sat beside me close, her shoulder against mine, and we sat like that for a long time before anything else happened. I put my hand over hers on her knee, and she turned her hand and held mine back, her fingers pressing through mine, and I felt the warmth of it go up my arm and into my chest and into the place that had been dark. It was not a dramatic thing. It was not a dramatic night. It was just that I was holding a woman's hand for the first time in 7 months, and she had walked 300 miles, and she was choosing to be here, and she was not doing it out of pity or duty, but because she had looked at me and found something worth choosing. That matters. To a man of a certain age and a certain life, you would be surprised how much that matters. I should tell you about the winter, because the winter was when I understood what she was. We had made the northern camp in good time and positioned well. The first storm came early, earlier than anyone predicted, and it came hard. 3 days of wind and snow that you couldn't see through, that packed the drifts up past the tops of the lodge doors, that killed 3 horses on the picket line before we could get them inside. On the second day, one of the elder women, Spotted Robe, who was 71 and had survived more winters than most people in camp had been alive, took sick. A chest thing. Rattling breath, fever, the gray color under the brown. The healer was doing what she could, but she came to me on the second night and said, "I don't know if I can keep her through this." Waste had been helping with Spotted Robe all day. She had things from her pack, herbs from the mission, dried and carefully wrapped in oilcloth, that the healer hadn't used before, and they conferred over them seriously, 2 women who respected each other's knowledge, and they tried some things that night. In the deep of that night, 3rd watch, coldest part, the wind pulling at the lodgeskins, I came to check on Spotted Robe and found Waste awake. She had not slept. She was sitting beside the old woman with her hand on her chest, just resting there, feeling the breathing. Her eyes were open and she looked up when I came in, and she didn't say anything, just looked at me with eyes that were tired and steady and not afraid. Spotted Robe lived. She was eating broth by the 5th day and complaining about the cold by the 7th, which the healer said was the surest possible sign. I don't tell you this to say Waste saved her, the healer saved her, and Spotted Robe's own will saved her. I tell you this because of what I saw in that woman's face in the middle of the night. She was not performing. She was not being seen doing good. She was just there in the cold and the dark, doing what needed doing because it needed doing. That is a particular kind of character. You see it clearly when nobody is watching and the conditions are bad. I had known her for 4 months by then, and I had not been sure, in the way you are not sure about a thing that matters too much to be careless with. After that night I was sure. In the deep of winter, when the days were short and people gathered indoors and the children needed stories to fill the time, I started telling them. Not the formal stories, those belonged to the old men who carried them, but stories of things I'd seen. Hunts that went wrong and then right. Storms I'd outlasted. The time a wolf came into camp in the early morning and sat down in the middle of everything and looked around like it was deciding whether to stay, and then stood up and walked back out, and we didn't speak of it because we didn't know what it meant. The children wanted more each night. My son noticed. He came to me one afternoon and sat down and said, "You are telling stories again." I said, "Is that a problem?" He said no, and then after a moment, "It's been a long time." I said, "I know." He said, looking at his hands, "She is good for you." I said, "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up and said, "I'm glad, Father, I thought," and he stopped. I said, "What did you think?" He said, "I thought you were going to keep going to the river every morning until you didn't come back." I looked at him for a long time. He had his mother's eyes. He was carrying the kind of worry a son his age should not have to carry, and he had been carrying it in silence because he was my son, and that is what we did. I said, "I'm here." He said, "I see that." Spring came slow that year. It always seems to, after a hard winter, and then arrived all at once, the way it does, the hills going green overnight and the birds loud and the horses restless. There is nothing in the world like a plains spring after a plains winter. It is a reminder that the world still has it in it, that it hasn't given up. By spring she and I had settled into a life together the way people settle in, not with announcements or ceremonies, though we had the ceremony later properly, with the right words said by the right people, but in the daily way, in the fact of each other in the morning and at night, in the shared fire and the shared quiet and the shared work of living. I want to tell you about one morning in particular, because it is the morning I think of when I think of what my life became after the darkest stretch of it. We were 3 days east of the winter camp, scouting the ground for summer pasture. Just the two of us, which was unusual, but the men I'd have brought were needed elsewhere, and the distance was short. We made camp on a rise above a creek, and the morning came up clear and cold, and the light was that particular early spring gold that makes everything look like it's been cleaned. I was up first and had the fire going, and I was looking east at the light on the hills when she came and stood beside me. She had her blanket around her and her hair unbraided from sleep, and she stood close enough that her shoulder was touching mine. She looked out at the light for a while, and then she said, "I used to wonder what I was for." I looked at her. She said, "At the mission, I was not fully one thing or fully another. The Lakota girls looked at me like I was white, and the white girls looked at me like I was Lakota, and I was neither fully, and I thought, what use is a person who doesn't fully belong anywhere?" I said, "What do you think now?" She looked at me, that direct look she had, that looked at you and not past you. She said, "I think I was for this, for here. For you and for the people." I said, "I think the same." She leaned in against my side, her weight against me, and I put my arm around her and held her there in the early spring light, the two of us looking east, and the world was very large and very quiet, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was more than I had thought I would have again. I am telling you this because I am old now and my son has my people and carries it well, and there is not much left for me to do except sit in the sun and remember things correctly. What I want you to understand, what I spent too long not understanding, is that a man can be good at the work of his life and still get lost. That is not weakness. That is being human. You can carry the people through 20 hard years and still find yourself going to the river every morning because you have run out of reasons to do anything else. And what I want you to understand is what it meant, what it did to me, that a woman walked 300 miles because her dying mother told her to, because something in her said this was right, because she looked at a man who had let himself go dark and saw not the darkness but what was underneath it, not what he had been once, but what he still was, what he could still be. She did not need me to perform strength I didn't have. She needed me to show up and decide things and eat and sleep and tell stories to children at night. She needed me to be present, which is harder than it sounds when you have been practicing absence. She saved me, and she would tell you she didn't, and we would both be right. Her feet healed. The scars are still there. I have held those feet in my hands and felt the ridges where the skin grew back different. She does not mind me touching them. She says they are just a record of a walk she took once. I think of those feet sometimes when I look at her, when she is doing something ordinary, grinding corn, laughing with the women, braiding her granddaughter's hair, and the morning light is on her and the world is going about its business. I think she walked 300 miles on those feet. She did not know what she would find. She came anyway. I am what she found. For a man who had gone to the river every morning and looked at the water line and thought about disappearing, that is not a small thing. It is everything. The light is on her now. It is always on her, or I am always watching for it. The creek is up this spring, more water than last year, and the horses are fat and the children are loud and my son is doing the hard work and doing it well, and she is sitting in the sun outside our lodge with her face turned up to it, eyes closed, just taking the warmth in. That is the last thing I will tell you. That she is there. That she is still there.